Hi there guys, we're well within spring and as a result lots of wild plants are growing through at the moment and lots of wild edibles as well. So I thought we'd go and find one specific wild edible today. We talk about it for ID purposes so you'll be able to identify it, about the kind of terrain it grows in and the parts of the world you'll find it in, so if you want to go and find it yourself. And obviously we'll dig it up, we'll process it and cook it and talk about its nutritional content. So by the end of the video, if you do want to approach this edible and actually eat it, you should have a good idea of what to do. You'll see behind me a yellow flower scattered all over the woodland floor. And it's very common edible indeed, especially where there's damp soil. So it's not too difficult to find, and that's one good thing about it. You can gather quite a lot of it, because there is a lot of it around, although it does require some caution to cook and process. But let's go take a closer look at it. The plant I've got here in front of me is called Lesser Celandine, and Lesser Celandine is a member of the buttercup family, so that's the Ranunculaceae family. And the thing about that particular family is it's got a lot of toxins associated with it, and none of the family are really edible. So Lesser Celandine is the only member of the family that's actually edible, and it does require some processing to leach the toxin out of it so you can benefit from its nutrition. But we'll go into that later when we actually start to cook and process it. But why would you approach this plant in this particular family? Well, if it's in your area and you actually wanted to utilise it, it has a lot of vitamin C within the root of the plant. Despite its toxin that we will process further later and actually make it edible so we can benefit from its nutrition, it makes a fantastic substitute for mashed potato or rice, or you can fry it like chips. You can really do anything you like with it after you've processed it and got rid of that toxin. The kind of terrain this plant is going to grow in, it's going to be in damp conditions. I'm on a moss bed woodland and it's very damp here. Even though it's been dry for a few days, all this moss and the root structure underground really hold water well, and there is quite a lot of clay here as well, so the topsoil generally holds water quite well too. So you're going to find it in damp conditions. So it grows all throughout the British Isles, in certain parts of Europe, so probably central, northern Europe, similar climates to this, provided the conditions are correct, and you will find it in parts of North America and Canada as well, where it's considered invasive, simply because it has a bit of an impact on various other wildflowers. But you'll find it in huge beds out there in sort of flooded woodlands, and you know, you can obviously eat it to your heart's content. I'm sure you'd be doing conservation a favour in that case. The kind of season that will go along with this plant is it will emerge very early in January, sometimes even before January, sort of late December. You'll see it coming through, and it'll be tiny, be really sort of dwarven and small, and there will be no flower. But the leaf is really how you will pick it out. The heart-shaped leaf is very easy to identify, and obviously the plant growing a lot of, like a dandelion or a fern for example, growing out of a central cluster of roots, will make it easy to identify if you sort of further dig it up and process it and you want to explore how the plant is built in terms of its structure. But the leaf is very easy to identify it by, and sometimes there'll be coloration on it, much like lords and ladies and certain types of ivy. But don't let that put off your ID. Really, you're just looking at the shape of the leaf and the structure of the plant if the flower isn't there for you to see. The flower will emerge sort of early March all the way through to May, and the flower has about 8 to 12 petals. It can differ, and it's yellow and very bright, about 2 centimetres in diameter at most. And yeah, it's very beautiful. It covers the forest floor, and you'll see it all around me here. Very obvious yellow flower. It draws you to it. You can go and have a look at it, provided you see that leaf structure there. You'll generally get a very clear idea of the plant, and you'll know what it is almost immediately if you're familiar with Celandine or you've got a field guide with you, and then you can sort of proceed further and explore it or utilise it how you want to. In my pack I always carry around a small shovel with me, just a folding trowel like that, and you can always attach a piece of hazel to the back end to lengthen it, but it's very good for tapping trees and creating runs to get sap, but very good for foraging if you're in the process of getting roots. The roots go down about 3 inches on this plant, and you really just want to circle the shovel or trowel around it like that. You don't have to worry too much because the roots go down like tubes. If we could just bring it up like that, you can see there's a few little roots about, but if we just uncover the roots away, you'll see we've got these kind of tubes that hang down. just like that. And you do need to give them a wash. So what I'm going to do is give this one a clean and we'll have a closer look at it. I've gathered a few clusters of celandine and I found a water source. I've had to come quite far to actually find this water source. I had to branch out a fair bit, but this is the best I can find. I imagine this would have been flowing quite rapidly in the floods some time back, but it's drying up a little bit now, so I've just got the leftovers. But I'll get these washed up and you can see how the roots look as they're washed. So you can see all the roots there. There's still a little bit of dirt on them, but I'll clean that off. There's obviously one of the parts of the plant that we're going to process and eat. So now I've washed these roots and washed the plants in general, you can see them a little bit clearer now. You can see the roots just coming off the base of the plant there, the little tubes. And that's really what we're going to be cooking up and processing. Now other parts of the plant you can eat. There's no reason why you can't eat the leaves and the stalks and the flowers as well. Although, you know, they do require some processing. We talked about the toxicity of the plant a little bit earlier. Being a member of the buttercup family, you know, they're renowned for having, you know, sort of toxins associated with them. Now the toxicity of this plant is that the chemical it contains will cause blistering of the skin if bruised and rubbed all over your skin or in the contact with the mouth, for example. And the toxicity of the plant varies depending on the time of year you approach it. If you approach it very early Jan, it might be lower. If you approach it after it's flowered, it might be lower. You know, in the heat of spring, like we're coming into now, it might be higher, because obviously the toxicity of this plant, the sap, assists nutrition getting from the root to the flower, and that's what this toxic chemical does. And it can cause blistering. It basically makes sap run a lot better. So what we're going to have to do is process this to make it safe. Now I have read that, you know, people have eaten the leaves of the plant while they're very young, you know, and added them to salads and things and eaten them, but personally I wouldn't risk it. I would just process the plant because heat neutralises the toxin and makes it okay to eat. So we're going to process this now, but first I need to get a fire going. So I've just got to set up some cooking apparatus real quick. So I've actually got a bit of an easier job when I'm doing some cooking. So I've made myself a very simple adjustable pot hanger there if I need to turn the heat up. I've got some wood, a nice bed of ash, got my ferro rod, and I brought some water out with me because I did have my suspicions about whether the water be flowing because things have dried out a bit. Obviously got my plants, my tinder fungus, which is cramp balls which I've just picked off some fallen ash, and a bit of honeysuckle bark. So I should have all the components needed really to do a bit of cooking. So I'll get started. Some of these cramp balls look dry, others don't. We'll certainly find out soon enough. And this one's alright. So I managed to get a fire going, but it did take some time. Just very damp materials basically, so you're sort of always trying to reach that optimum temperature. So I've chopped the roots off the plant and I'm going to bring them to a boil, and I'm going to do it twice. So 2 changes of water, bring to a boil, leave for 2 minutes, tip the water away, bring to a boil again, leave for 2 or 3 minutes, tip away, and then ready to eat. And what that will do is it will neutralise any toxins, it will leach it of anything I don't want, and the change of water will really help that. And that last change of water at the end will make it ready to eat. In my opinion, I just really like the root on this plant. You know, I don't really eat the leaves or anything else, although you can cook those as well and neutralise the toxicity and eat them, as I'm sure you can do with the flowers, and I imagine some people do that. But for me, all I've done here is just taken the plant, cut it just high of the root. Obviously you'd wash that first. This is one I've just dug up a second ago to show you. Popped it in the pot, and this is the first boil that I'm just bringing it to now. So we'll just keep an eye on it, and then we can change the water soon enough. So that's boiling quite nicely now. We'll let that boil for a couple of minutes, change the water. Alright, so this has been boiling for a couple of minutes now, so we'll just change the water. So back on for the second boil, and that should be it, ready to eat. So we'll let this boil for a couple of minutes and then drain it, and then they're ready to go. So it's been boiling for a couple of minutes now, so we're ready to drain the second batch of water. Take that off. Drain the water out. Okay, so get these served up. So at the end of the process there, by boiling them, we're left with some boiled roots, and we'll try them. So a lot like rice, really, or sort of potato-y texture. You know, they're not really amazingly tasty, but I'm sure there's more you could do to make them tastier than that. You could fry them, for example. I mean, that method I just used there is probably really good if you're, you know, you're processing lots of them, and you want to boil a mass of them together and make like a mashed potato substitute, or rice or pasta, something like that, something starchy that's going to fill you up and go alongside something else. They do contain a lot of vitamin C, which is great, so you do benefit from that nutrition. Another thing I use, and I keep in here now, I used to keep it in a slightly different container, is a bit of fat. This is pig fat, or bacon grease, that I've just rendered down and purified a bit. So I've got a frying pan here, or a plate that I can put a handle on or make a handle for and use as a frying pan. I might want to fry them and make little chips, and that might be something a bit better suited if you've got a smaller amount and you know, you want them to taste a bit better rather than mix them in with something else like mashed potato. So they taste a lot better when you fry them, just on their own, for example. Yeah, it tastes so much better. So obviously the bacon grease gives it some flavour, and I carry some salt and pepper and various other spices in the other end, so I can always spice them up a bit. So they could make a decent meal, provided which way you approach them for cooking. But if you do want to make like you know, like a mash substitute, for example, it's probably better to just boil them and then mash them up with something else to give them some good flavour. And provided you collect enough of them, you can make a really filling meal alongside some meat or any protein or game that you bring with you or catch while you're out, or fish, for example, if you're fishing. So they do go quite well, but there is another way that you can cook them if you're on the move and you really want to be quick about it. So another way in which you can approach the edible is just by placing the roots in the embers of a fire and leaving it there for a good few minutes. And then you can take it out and you can eat the root. But I wouldn't really recommend doing it that way. You do end up with a lot of grit in your mouth and it's very bitter and it's not particularly tasty. Although, you know, there might be, you know, a requirement for doing it that way in different parts of the world. You never really know, you know, what scenarios people will end up in. So it is an option, and it is something you can do if you don't have a container or anything to cook it on and you have got a fire going and that edible plant is available to you. But just make sure you wash it first if you can and leave it in there for a good few minutes, really to bake on some good hot embers, and then you can obviously eat them that way and spend some time kind of replenishing some nutrition in yourself. So guys, I hope that helped when approaching lesser celandine. It's probably one of the more complex edibles to approach. There are a lot of them out there that need processing, but this one obviously has a degree of toxicity to it, so it needs to be processed to eliminate that toxicity, make it edible for you, and obviously palatable, you know, so it's not bitter and it tastes good. By boiling it, you know, a couple of boils, or if you've got a large quantity, you know, you want to judge it and boil it more and more so the water's nice and clear and they look good. And obviously you can do a taste test part of the way through, see how bitter they are, how crunchy they are, and then you know whether you want to sort of boil them again if they're really bitter and not to your liking. Then after that you can mash them up, salt, pepper, all the rest of it. If you get a bit of wood pigeon, maybe have some steak and potatoes in the woods, and it does taste pretty good. But you can fry them like little chips as well, which is a really tasty way of doing it if you've got goose fat or bacon grease, which is what I'm using at the moment, because bacon grease really does hold its solidity a bit more in hot weather, which we are coming into now. Goose fat tends to get a bit runny. You know, it does make them taste a bit better. But if you are getting into foraging or bushcraft and you want to go out there and sustain yourself from a food perspective, it's best to have a look at other edibles. There are a lot out there that don't require any processing at all, and they're very tasty, and you can just pick them and eat them all day long. And if you take some provisions with you, they go well with other provisions that you do bring out in the field, so there's no shame in bringing things with you. Obviously I bring, you know, hot chocolate and salt and pepper, sometimes flour with me, you know, out in the woods to make other things with, to go with game that I might get, for example, and make myself a decent meal. So it is really good coming out and doing this side of bushcraft, and coming into spring it's the best time to do it. So now's the time, guys, really to get out, have a look at those edibles, take an ID book with you, and you know, just see what's out there and try, you know, perhaps try some of the safer ones, and you know, like bittercress, for example, or sorrels. They're really tasty and good ones to start with. But I will be doing a lot of videos on edibles throughout this year, all the way through to autumn, you know, focusing on one edible per video, exploring its habitat, ID, where you might find it, for example, and then processing it in a few different ways, and then obviously trying it and showing different ways and things you can do with it. And I just think it helps kind of put that edible in perspective, as opposed to my other videos, which are really just me going through a whole string of them, for example. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and appreciate you watching. And if you have any questions, then please feel free to comment below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And thanks again for watching.